Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Zevachim Daf Kuf Yubet. We're going to finish the second to last chapter and begin our last chapter. And in fact, we're going to learn mostly the Mishnayot of that chapter. The whole, whatever we're going to learn today, they basically organize, this happens sometimes, where we see they put all the Mishnayot on one page. And then after that, we'll get to all the Gemaras on those Mishnayot. So we're going to learn a lot of different topics today, as we're going to go through almost all the Mishnayot of the 14th chapter, which is our last chapter, which leads me just to remind everyone that the Siyum is next week on Sunday. We're going to have a great program with Dr. Malka Simkovich, giving kind of the historical piece of the Second Temple period and the centrality of the temple during that time. And we're going to finish the Masechet. So that's Sunday. As I mentioned before, I'll just remind everyone there is no class on Monday. You can use it as an opportunity to listen to Dr. Ayel Hoffman Lipson's introduction to Masechet Menachot, which will go up by then, and also those who can join the workshop on Menachot, you're all invited to come and join. And like I said, anyone who can't, B'ezrat Hashem, one day you'll be in Israel and you can go visit on your own. It's always open and available for visitors. Okay, we're going to get started with back to our Mishnah. So we finished the class yesterday, the shir, with the Mishnah. So let's just review the Mishnah a little bit. We'll review it in parts. There's 3 parts to the Mishnah. The first part is if you receive the blood of a chatat in one cup, and then all different permutations of you then did some outside, some inside, or some inside, then some outside, which when you obligated an outside, and again, the theory always is you're obligated outside if you would have been liable for if you would have, fulfilled your obligation by doing it inside. So therefore, let's just go through the cases again. If you did it bachutz, you did it first outside and then went inside, so obviously you're liable because when you did it outside, you theoretically, you were supposed to do it inside at that point. So the fact that you did it after inside is irrelevant. At the point you did it outside, you were liable. If you did it first inside and then you did it outside, you're also liable. Why are you liable? Because you could have brought the whole thing inside. Now this is a little bit strange, and that's the first thing the Gemara jumps on, which is Bishlama b'chutz v'chazar v'natan b'fnim. I'm just reviewing the Mishnah in parts. I'll review each part before we get to the relevant part. If you did it outside and then went and did it inside, shekulo ro'oi li'ot b'fnim. So we get it because, as he said, everything theoretically could have gone inside at that point. The blood was supposed to be brought inside. But if you first did it inside, then you fulfilled your obligation already. So the fact that you do it outside now, you should actually be exempt. All that's left in that cup is the remainder, and you're not obligated. Remember, the remainder is not critical, although we did say in the previous stuff that what? Hamani Rabbi Nechemia. They said the Mishna must be Rabbi Nechemia. Ta'amar shirei adam shekrivam b'chutz chayav. This Mishnah obviously follows Rabbi Nechemia because Rabbi Nechemia said even the remainder is essential to the fulfillment of the mitzvah, and therefore it has to, if you do it outside, you take the remainder, which is what that case was talking about, and you offer it outside, you sprinkle the blood outside, you're going to be liable. The problem is the next part of the Mishnah. And the Gemara is going to say, Rabbi Nechemia ema seifa. Now let's go through the seifa. So here we don't have to go back to the Mishnah because the Gemara quotes it. The second part of the Mishnah was this part about what if you collected the blood in 2 different cups. You might remember we had a sugya about this earlier in the Masechet. If you don't remember, it's okay. We're going to actually go back there very soon. But first, they're going to ask a question. Okay, if you poured the blood of both inside, you're exempt. Exempt from what? Well, exempt from offering it outside because obviously you didn't offer anything outside. This is right. I mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, you don't really need to say this case because it's obvious that you're not obligated for bringing anything outside. You didn't bring it. But because they want to give all the permutations, so they mention this. Shnehem b'chutz chayav. Obviously, why are you liable for both outside? Because when you bring the first cup outside, you could have brought it inside and you didn't, so you're liable for doing it outside. Then once you ruined the first cup, so to speak, because you brought it outside, the second cup now still can be brought inside, and therefore, if you bring it outside instead, right, and again, not just bring it outside, you pour it on an altar outside to, claiming like this is how I want to pour the blood, you're going to be liable. Echa b'fnim ve'echa b'chutz patur. Now here comes the problem. If you did the first cup inside and the second cup outside, you're going to be exempt. Now why are you going to be exempt? Because you already fulfilled your obligation and this blood doesn't need to do anything with it. But wait a minute. If you're Rabbi Nechemia, Ha'amar Rabbi Nechemia, She'arei Adam Shekrivam B'chutz Chayav. This is also shirayim, right? Because what happened? You slaughtered the animal, right? This was all done inside. You collected the blood in 2 cups. So if you spilled the blood of the first cup and you poured it on the altar inside, what's remaining in the second cup is also a remainder and should be poured on the base of the altar. So the fact that you brought it outside, you should actually be liable if we're still in Rabbi Nechemia. So this doesn't make any sense. If we're going to say the first part is Rabbi Nechemia, who thinks that the remainder in the first part you're liable for, then the remainder in the second part you should be liable for it as well. So the answer, no, because Seifa Atan Latana Kama de Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Here we're going to go back to a sugya we learned previously. What is the halacha of 2 cups? If you have 2, or in that case we even have 4 cups, let's say you collect the blood in 4 cups. Is the blood in the extra cups considered a remainder? Or is it not just not a remainder? Is it considered dachui? What does it mean, dachui? Rejected. Remember the whole concept of rejection in the temple, right? If something's rejected, it can't go on the altar anymore. Now, if you have blood in 2 cups, 3 cups, 4 cups, doesn't matter how many, and then you take one of the cups and you do the presentations of the blood on the altar with that cup, what you're basically saying is, again, there's a machloket about it. Some people say the rest is the remainder, and you have to take all the blood from all those cups and pour it on the altar, on the base of the altar, like the shirayim, in which case you would be liable for doing it outside. But that's Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. But the Tanakama, what they're saying is the Seifa Atan, that our Seifa matches Tanakama, and according to some Girsaot, they even say here, and who is that Tanakama? There's some words missing here from some of the manuscripts. Who is that Tanakama? It's Rabbi Nechemia, okay, and that fits perfectly then with Rabbi Nechemia. The whole thing is Rabbi Nechemia here, who says, Amar kos osed dachui lechavero. If I choose 1 cup, I'm basically rejecting all the others. So when I take 1 cup, if I collected the blood in multiple cups, as soon as I take one, the rest are rejected. And that's why, if I then offer the blood using that one, all the blood in the other cups are completely rejected. And therefore, if I pour them outside on an altar, I'm not liable because I couldn't have brought them inside. And now we've resolved those issues. So we dealt with part 1, and the one question we had there, we fit it in with Rabbi Nechemia. Then we said, wait, based on, if you're going to say that's Rabbi Nechemia, this is something in the Seifa doesn't make it, and then the second case doesn't make any sense. And then we resolved that as well and showed how the whole thing matches Rabbi Nechemia's position. And we're assuming Rabbi Nechemia holds like Tanakama in that machloket of, is the cup considered rejected, which Rabbi Nechemia holds yes. Rabbi Shimon says no, it's actually considered remainder. Okay, either rejected or remainder, and that obviously has huge ramifications for if you offered it outside. Of course, though, it would only have ramifications for Rabbi Nechemia, because the ones who disagree with Rabbi Nechemia say the remainder is not critical. If you offer the remainder outside, you're actually not going to be obligated. So, actually, it sounds like Rabbi Shimon would probably not hold like him, and then he wouldn't obligate him either, but for a different reason. Okay, now we want to get to the third part of the Mishnah. What the third part of the Mishnah does, which is really connected to the second part, which was the case with 2 cups. It then said that we're going to see the exact same thing in the case of someone who designates 2 animals. Now, in what case did they designate 2 animals? In a case where, right, the same way 2 cups, same thing with 2 animals, and it's going to be the exact same permutations. If you did this way, that way, right? If you did both inside, you're going to be patur. You did both outside, you're going to be chayav. What was the case? Where I designated an animal for my sin offering, and then I lost the animal. And then I brought another one in its place, and then I have 2, and then I found the first one. So now I have 2 animals before me, and that's when they go into all the details. If I did both inside, I did both outside, and all that. Now, it says, they want to know, why did they make that comparison? Lema davar domeh, lemafrish chatato v'avda, v'frish acheret tachtea, v'achar kach nimtzet harishona. So that's exactly what I just said. This is similar to that case. So now the Gemara wants to know, lema davar domeh lamali. Why did you need to bring that? What was the point? What did we gain from this? Right? It's nice to make comparisons. Right? I like to do it when I teach. I say, oh, this is just like something else. Right? It helps people to understand things, but first of all, it's a bit of a complicated case to start comparing it to, like the whole thing about the animal being lost and bringing a different one. What did they gain by doing this? So the answer, Hamane, who is this according to? Rebbe. The Mishnah matches Rebbe's position, who says the following. Avuda b'sh'at hafrasha meta. If the animal was lost at the time you designated the second one, then what happens? This ends up becoming, when you then bring one of the animals, the other animal is considered it was a chatat. It was designated to be a sin offering. And while there was no other sin offering, so this was the one. Okay, we're going to see why that's important. At that moment, okay, so let's just start off. Your first thing you did, you designated an animal for a sin offering. Next thing happens is it gets lost. So then you separate a new animal for a sin offering. At that point, you designated it was your one sin offering. Then you find the original. So now you have two. And then we're going to have the halachot we have. And as they say, they're going to read them inside. The hachi kamra. And this is what they want to say. Now, let's just go back through the cases, okay? So before we get to the Gemara. So again, if you do both inside, you're exempt, obviously, because you didn't do anything outside. You did them both outside, you're obligated, because then when you slaughtered the first one, it theoretically could have been brought inside, and then you brought it outside, right? So you're obligated. And then when you got rid of that animal, because you slaughtered it outside and you ruined it, so now we want to do the second animal. The second animal could be brought inside, and therefore if you do it outside, you're liable. Okay, that's obvious. But now comes the unique case. This is the exact one we discussed in the other one right now, in the parallel case, in the two cups. If you did one inside and one outside, you're exempt. Now, why are you exempt? Because once you do the one inside, the one outside, according to what we just read, has to be left to die. You can't do anything with it. You can't sacrifice it. So because you can't sacrifice it, you're obviously not liable for sacrificing it outside. So here's what the chidush is, and this is why they wanted to bring this case. V'hachi ka'amar, I'm back in the Gemara here. Ta'ama da'avda. The reason is because it was lost. Now, when else could I have a case of two animals? You might remember we've discussed cases like this, either because one gets lost and I bring a different one, and then we find it. What about a different case? Now, what they're going to say is, the reason the Mishnah told you this was basically because it was a case where we replaced this animal because it got lost, and we only have one animal at the time we designated the new one, right? We had no animals when we designated the new one. It was the one. Okay, that's different than, let's say I'm a complete warrior, and because I'm a warrior, I decide, you know what? I have to bring this sin offering. I'm going to the temple. I'm going to bring with me two animals, and I bought two animals. La'achrayut, they call it, for backup, right? To make sure that I have an animal. Now that's going to be a different case, because when I designate those two, when I designated that one animal to replace the lost one, I knew this was going to be my animal, right? In the case of two animals, I knew only one of them was going to be an animal that I was going to sacrifice, and not both. So why is this different? Now we're going to say like this. One of them from the beginning, doesn't matter which one, right? We didn't designate which one, but one of them is going to end up being a korban olah. Why is that? Because what do I do really? Well, when I designate two animals, now we've learned already, once I give sanctity to an animal, I can't just remove it, right? So I designated two animals as sin offering, because I said I'm bringing these both for my sin offering. Then I get to the temple, I decide one of them is going to be the sin offering, let's take this one. In the meantime, I didn't lose any animals, even though I was worried something might happen. I bring it on the altar, or I sacrifice it. What do we do with the other one? Well, it becomes an olah, but it doesn't directly become an olah. It morphs into an olah, as I like to say, which means what? Well, we have to wait till it's blemished. It was designated as a sin offering. I can't take a sin offering and offer it as a burnt offering. So what do? Now why does it become an olah? Because it can only go up in sanctity and not down in sanctity. I can't turn it into a shlamim where I can eat the meat, because when it was a sin offering, I couldn't eat the meat. So I have to bring it, right, only the kohanim can eat the meat. So I have to bring it to a high, and it's kodesh kodeshim, not kodeshim kal. I have to bring it to a higher level. So I bring it as an olah. So what does that mean? I wait till it gets a blemish. I sell it. I take the money and I buy a korban olah with it. So it is potentially can turn into, right? It's supposed to turn into a korban olah. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, then we're going to add one more thing. Ukid Rav Huna Amar Rav. And then you have to say this goes according to Rav Huna Amar Rav. Again, remember, we're trying to figure out why this is here. In the end, we're saying, why is this here? To say, this case is completely comparable, but the case of achrayut, two for achrayut, would not be comparable. The halacha would not be the same. So it's really to tell us this inference, that it really wouldn't be the same. Because why? Da'amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. Now, Rav Huna Amar Rav, Rav Huna says in the name of Rav a different case, where it's not a chatat, it's a sin offering, it's an asham. Kind of the same, right? Same. Okay, maybe yes, maybe no, we'll talk about that soon. But asham shenitak l're'iyah, if you have an asham that's supposed to be designated to graze, meaning it got disqualified, you can't use it or something happened with it, like there were two, and now, that you designated two from the beginning, you used one, the other one can't be used anymore because you fulfilled your obligation for your guilt offering, so you leave it to graze. But then, shachato stam, what if I slaughtered it? Okay, I just ended up, by accident, I just slaughtered it without any intent for anything. Now it's a korban, I already did me, it's a korban, but now it can't be, it's supposed to morph into an ola, it's supposed to get a blemish, then I sell it, take the money, buy an ola. What if I already slaughtered it and didn't wait? Kasher la'ola, I can sacrifice this as a korban ola. Now why is this relevant? Because if we take this to our case, then we say, if it was two chatats that I designated from the beginning, not the one that we just said has to die because I designated in place when I lost the other one, and then it was 100% a chatat, and now it can't be used as a chatat, so what do? I have to leave it to die, and I can't offer it inside, which means I'm not obligated outside. But if I did two ashams, and so to speak, then we could say the same thing for two chatats. Since b'di'evet, post facto, if I actually slaughter the second one, and as I slaughter the first, I fulfill my obligation. Now that extra one is supposed to become, after it gets blemished, take the money, buy an ola. But the halacha, according to Rav, is if I actually slaughtered it without any intent for anything, we're going to take that and sacrifice it as an ola. Well, if it can be taken and sacrificed as an ola inside, that means that I'm liable if I offer it outside. So if I slaughter or offer up that animal outside, I'm going to be liable. That's not what it says in the Mishnah, right? So the case in the Mishnah is only if it was lost. But if it was to lachrayut, since that korban could theoretically be a korban ola, therefore I'm liable if I did it outside. So if I did the first one inside and the second one outside, I will be liable. That's what they want to tell you. The whole point to bring this was to infer that other case. Okay? Now, now you might say, okay, that case is kind of out, like that wasn't our topic really. But you could say, no, they want to teach you another law, again, infer this from this, some other law regarding offering outside. In the Koren translation, in the Steinsaltz, they add this other line, though, that I wanted to just read to you. They say the analogy teaches that with regard to the blood collected in two cups, he wants to bring it back to the two cups. In other words, in the end, we want to bring this back to teach us something about our case. If one offers a blood from the unused cup outside, he's exempt only because the blood in that cup is considered disqualified, but he wouldn't be exempt if it was considered a remainder. And as they go back to the remainder, the difference between something disqualified and something left over. Okay? Something left over could still be used for something else, and therefore you'll be liable. So when it's considered a remainder, but if it's disqualified, and that was the whole thing that we said in the previous section, the two cup, one, right? The one you choose one cup, it's disqualified. Disqualified is an issue, but remainder is not. And that's what they want to teach you from the second part. So that at least brings it back to our topic. Okay, but anyway, now we're going to finish up with a difficulty on that, which is midame. Wait a minute. How could you compare Rav's case with an asham to a chatat? Our case in the Mishnah is a sin offering. There's a big difference between a guilt offering and a sin offering. What is that? Well, a very simple difference, a practical difference. Hatam asham zachal ve'ola zachal. An asham is brought from a male animal, and an ola, a burnt offering, is brought from a male animal. And that's why the asham that you, instead of waiting for the blemish, you just slaughter right away. We're going to offer it as an ola because it's male and it can be offered as an ola. Aval chatat nekevahi. But a chatat can never be offered as an ola because a chatat is female animal, right? The individual sin offering you bring is always a female animal. And the ola is a male animal. So you could never take this animal and say, oh, if you slaughtered it, stam, it could actually be brought as an ola, because it can't be, because there's no such thing as a female ola. So how could you say that that's what this Mishnah is teaching you? To which they answer, Amar Rabbi Chia, miyastimia b'si'ir nasi. It could be in a case where you're a nasi, okay, now it limits this derivation in the Mishnah to a very, very unique case. It's going to say, right, what was the point of bringing this lamad davar domeh, this parable, this comparison? Well, the reason to bring it was because of this inference, and this inference for a very unique particular case, which is if the nasi sinned unwittingly, they have to bring a se'irizim, which is a male goat, and then it could be used as an ola. So that would be a case where, again, the Mishnah is talking about a case where it couldn't go as an ola, and it's trying to teach you, but if it could have, if it wasn't disqualified, but let's say the nasi designated two animals just in case, the second one, if you offered it outside, would be liable because theoretically you could have brought it inside as an ola. And then we've already really pigeonholed this into something very narrow. With that, Hadran Alacha Shochet B'Amale, and we're going to start the new chapter. And as I said at the beginning of class, we're now going to just read straight through all the Mishnayot of the chapter, other than the last one, which we'll leave for tomorrow because it's in tomorrow's stuff. Okay. What we're basically getting to last chapter was all about things you offer outside that you're going to be liable for. Offer, do, right? Different actions you do that you're going to be liable. Slaughtering, offering up, sprinkling the blood, all that. Now we're going to talk about all sorts of exceptions to the rule, and then we're going to get to a historical background of the Bamot, which you kind of wish they had given us in the beginning of chapter 13. Okay, and that's what, we had Shiurim also beyond the daf of Shuli, Mishkan, and Flashback, and also Alanis Stein Hain, did in daf about the whole thing of Bamot to get back in depth about. Here, finally, the Mishnah is going to actually start telling you some details about what was the history and how did it work. So, Parat Chatat Shesarfa, we're going to have a lot of different topics because we're just going Mishnah, right? And each Mishnah is a different topic, but they're all kind of connected. Parat Chatat Shesarfa Chutz Migita. Parat Chatat is the Para Aduma. Now, we're going to have two exceptional cases where these are things that if you slaughter them outside, you're not going to be liable. Okay, one is slaughtering the Para Aduma not outside the Azara. It's supposed to be outside the Azara. Obviously, you're not going to be liable, but you slaughter it outside its place. A gat is usually a wine press, but it's like a pit in the ground. You use as a wine press. So this is a pit in the ground where generally they would do the Para Aduma ceremony, which was done at Mount of Olives. So if you burnt it, some people have the gears if you slaughtered it. Okay, either way, both the slaughtering and the burning happened in this pit or near this pit. So if you did that outside its pit, outside the area that was designated for it, you're not liable. Okay, we'll see in a minute why not. The seir that we throw off the cliff, the seir lazazel, the scapegoat on Yom Kippur. Again, it's first of all, it's not even supposed to be slaughtered. Okay, and the whole action happens outside. Right, it's sent off to the desert, thrown off a cliff. So if you slaughtered it outside Patur, you're going to be exempt. Okay, someone asked this question in the Hebrew Shir, so I just want to make sure that this is completely clear. When we talk about slaughtering outside, we're talking about slaughtering outside something that was designated as a sacrifice. In this case, designated for the Para Aduma, designated for the Seir Mishalach, right? We're taking something that had a designation, and then we're doing a slaughtering outside, not just any animal that's slaughtered outside. Okay, this is particularly you took an animal that was designated for something, and then, right, designated for a sacrifice, and then you slaughtered it or offered it outside. In these cases, there's no prohibition at all. Why? Shene'emal, because what did the pasuk say? And we're going to go back today to these pasukim. El Petach in Vayikra Yud Zayin and also in Dvarim chapter 12. El Petach ol moed lo hevi'o. It says, and you didn't bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, the ol moed, which is also the in the Mishkan, and it's in the Beit HaMikdash in later times. Right? The whole point is you did it outside and you didn't bring it to Petach Ol Moed. Well, if it was never supposed to be in Ol Moed, then obviously it's outside the framework of this halacha. Now we're going to have all sorts of animals that you'll remember from other situations that we discussed, disqualified animals that can't be offered. So if I designate an animal that can't be offered because it was a rovea, a nirba, right? It engaged in bestiality, either initiated or initiated by man. Muktzeh, it was designated for idol worship, or nevad, or it was worshipped for idol worship. Hamachir v'ha'etnan, those are the two things. You either sell a dog for this animal or you used it as a gift for a prostitute. Those things are disgraceful and not allowed into the temple. V'hakilayim, right, not allowed as sacrifices. Hakilayim, a mixed breed of an animal, also not allowed. Has to be completely ashore, completely a par, whatever it might be. A para, right? Whatever the animal might be. Treifa. Treifa is if the animal was not kosher because if you slaughtered it, and then you find out it's sick, it was going to die within 12 months, or even if before you slaughtered it, it was like that. It's not a kosher slaughtering and can't be brought. It's korban, nor can it be eaten at all if you're not in the Beit HaMikdash. And yotzei dofen, if it wasn't born with a regular birth, okay, a natural birth, but a cesarean birth, it's not valid. That's because when it talks about sacrifices, a be'ema ki yivaled, when it is born, it has to be a natural birth. All of those, shikrivan b'chutz patur, shene'amar lifnei mishkan Hashem. Okay, that's the pasuk el mo'ed lo v'o, and then it says to bring it el mishkan Hashem, to the mishkan, to the place where God dwells, and these animals can't be brought there. So kol she'ein ra'oi lavo lifnei mishkan Hashem, if it's not valid to come before the mishkan of God, ein chayavin alav, you're not liable for it. Okay, so all these you're not going to be liable. More cases similar, ba'alei mumim. Now we're going to get to 3 cases where there's machloket Tanakama and the rabbis. Okay, I'm sorry, Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon. Ba'alei mumim, blemished animals. Now there's 2 types of blemishes. One is permanent and one is temporary. So here Tanakama says, bein ba'alei mumim kfu'im, whether they're permanent blemishes, we're now going to turn to Amud Bet, bein ba'alei mumim ovrim, or whether they're going to pass. Shekrivam b'chutz patur. Either which way, they're disqualified right now for the altar. So if you offer them outside, you're not liable. Rabbi Shimon omer, ba'alei mumim kfu'im patur, ba'alei mumim ovrim chayav b'lo ta'aseh. Now he creates this new thing, which the rabbis don't like. He says there's some cases where you're going to be liable a lo ta'aseh. You're going to transgress a negative prohibition, but you're not going to get karet. Remember, this whole thing, you get karet if you offer something outside, cut off, right? Which means you have to bring a sin offering if you do it unwittingly. But he's going to create a category where it's prohibited to offer this outside, but you're not going to get that severe punishment. And what he says is, a baal mum that's going to, a blemish that's going to pass, well, since ultimately down the road you'll be able to sacrifice this inside, we're actually going to say this is prohibited to offer outside right now. Even though right now it can't be offered inside, since down the road it will be able to be offered inside, it's prohibited now. And then again, it's prohibited without karet, okay, and therefore without a chatat. And we're going to have 2 more cases that are same case, same machloket, different cases but same principle. Torim shelo igia zmanam ubnei yonah she'avar zmanam. These are the 2 types of birds you bring for sacrifices. Either torim, which are turtle doves, or bnei yonah, pigeons, but they're young pigeons. So there's different ages. The torim are older, the bnei yonah are younger. So if the torim, they're at an age where they haven't yet become a tol that you can bring, okay, so they're too young, or the bnei yonah that are too old, that they pass their time. Okay, you can obviously see where this is going. The ones who pass their time will never be valid on the altar, but the ones who haven't reached their time ultimately will reach their time. Now, Rashi quotes the Gemara in Chulin, which we'll get to. What's this time frame? So there's actually 3 times. In the middle time frame, none of them are worthy of sacrifice. Okay, so let's just talk about it. What happens apparently, I didn't check this in reality, but according to this Gemara, their wings start turning gold, and then golden, they get a golden hue to them, and then they completely turn gold at a certain point, both the Torim and the Bnei Yonah. So the Bnei Yonah are at the age until their wings start to turn to gold, and the Torim are only once the wings are completely gold. So that time in between, when wings started turning golden, but didn't really become fully gold, none of the birds can be offered. But the Torim are after that point, and the Bnei Yonah are before that point. And that's just a side point, just so you understand what they're talking about. So according to Tanakama, again, if they haven't reached their time, or they pass their time, right, the Torim haven't yet reached their time, or the Bnei Yonah have passed their age, patur, you're exempt from offering them outside. Rabbi Shimon omer, Bnei Yonah she'avar zmanam patur. I agree with you about the young ones. If they pass their time, okay, they'll never be valid for the altar. But Torim shelo igia zmanam b'lo ta'aseh. But again, the Torim, the turtle doves that haven't reached their point of being allowed, are going to be lo ta'aseh. Now, Oto, did I just say them wrong? The Bnei Yonah, the Bnei Yonah are the pigeons, and the Torim are the turtle doves. Okay. Oto ve'et beno u'mechusar zman patur. Okay, now we have 2 other categories, and these are based on psukim. Oto ve'et beno means you can't slaughter an animal and its son on the same day. Usually we assume this means mother and offspring, because usually we know it goes by the mother. We don't really know who the father is. But some commentaries actually say that if you know who the father is, you can't offer the father and the child on the same day either. Child could be male or female, even though it says beno, son, it means male or female offspring. Okay, you can't slaughter them both on the same day. Now this is again a case where, well, tomorrow, and then how does it work? Well, it doesn't matter which one you slaughter first, the other one is now forbidden. If you did the offspring, then the mother, you can't slaughter. If you did the mother, then the offspring, okay? But the second one can be offered the next day. You just can't do it all on the same day. And mechusar zman is that any animal can't be valid the first 7 days of its life for a sacrifice. It says it in explicit pasuk, Only on day number 8 can you bring it as a sacrifice. That's also the same pasuk where it says when it's born. Okay, it has to be 7 days under its mother, and only on the 8th day can you offer it. So mechusar zman is it's not yet ready to be offered. Now you can see how both those are cases where, well, tomorrow for the Tevet B'no case, and mechusar zman, whatever you get to day number 8, you'll be able to sacrifice it. So again, Rabbi Shimon's going to disagree. So according to Tanakama Patur, you're exempt. Rabbi Shimon says, "Areza below taseh." And now we get negative prohibition. Now we're going to get Rabbi Shimon's principle. She Rabbi Shimon umil, because he holds koshu ra'oi lavo lachar zman, anything that will be valid later on, hareza below taseh. Already now, today, it's prohibited to offer this outside, ve'ein bo karet, and you won't get karet for it, though. Why the Chachamim disagree? Chachamim omrim, kol she'ein bo karet, ein bo lo taseh. The pasuk has a negative prohibition, and the pasuk has a punishment. It's karet. So the negative prohibition is only going to be relevant where there's karet. So you agree with me there's no karet, so if there's no karet, there's no negative prohibition. Now they talk about mechusar zman, bein begufo, bein beba'alav. Okay, so they say mechusar gufo, there's two kinds of mechusar zman. Mechusar zman, there's two types. One is what we talked about before. The animal's not old enough yet. The other one is the owner is not supposed to bring this korban yet. Like, for example, if I'm a nida, or not a nida, yoledet, or a zava, or a zav, or one of those kind of cases, or a mitzora, or a nazir, okay, all those people have a particular day they're supposed to bring it, right? They go through some purification process, and at the end of that, they can do that. So let's say I designate my animal for one of those sacrifices, and then I bring it too early instead of waiting, let's say, for the mitzvah for the 7th day, right, for the 8th day actually, right? You're supposed to do 7 days of purity, you go through this purification process. On the 8th day, you're supposed to bring your sacrifice, and I bring it on day 3, let's say, okay? So that's a mechusar zman. It's not yet its time as relates to the baalim, to the owner. It's not yet the time for the owner to bring that sacrifice. So now they want to tell you what are these examples. Ezu mechusar zman beba'alav, hazav, hazavav, yoledet, v'mitzora, the ones I gave the example of. They don't bring the nazir, but it would be a nazir also. Shekrivu chatatam va'ashamam b'chutz ptulim. Now if they bring their sin offering or their guilt offering, some of them bring sin, some of them bring guilt offerings, if they bring those outside, they're exempt, because those have not gotten to the time where you're obligated. However, olotehem v'shalmehem b'chutz chayavim. If they bring, now with those korbanot, okay, most of them, the yoledet, zav, mitzora, and zava, all have to bring a korban ola. The nazir has to bring not only a korban ola with his sin offering, his 3, chatat, ola, and shlamim. So the olot and the shlamim that go with these korbanot, since they could be brought as voluntary offerings whenever anybody wants, so even though this one has a particular time frame for it, and you brought it before that time frame, but since olot and shlamim can always be brought as voluntary offerings, if you offer that one outside, on day 3, let's say, you're actually obligated. So he differentiates between, right, the Mishna here differentiates between the chatat and asham, which can only be brought for this person and their time hasn't yet come, that you wouldn't be obligated, but the olot and shlamim, which can be brought anytime, you will be. Now the last category here, before we get to the history of Bamot, and Mishkan and Beit HaMikdash, is what about all sorts of things? We're going to have 2 categories within this. The first is all sorts of things that don't get eaten. That don't get burned, they get eaten, okay? They're not meant to be burned outside. So let's say you burn them outside. So since they're meant to be eaten, and there's no obligation to bring them inside or do something inside, except for eating them. Okay, most of them actually are eaten inside. But if you offer them and burn them outside, you're not obligated, because they weren't things that were supposed to be brought and offered up on the fire in Ohel Moed. Hamaleh mi basar chatat. So if you offer up, burn the meat of the sin offering, which is supposed to be meant for the Kohanim, or mi basar asham, mi basar kodesh kodesh, right? So either the chatat, the asham, or the shalmei tzibor, like the ones you do on Shavuot, the shnei kifsei atzeret. Those are all high sanctity offerings. They're supposed to be eaten inside by the Kohanim. If you burn them outside, you're not obligated because they're not meant to be eaten. Mi basar kochim kalim, the meat of the kochim kalim is given to the owner to eat. Again, you burn it outside, you're not obligated. Motar omer, the remainder of the korban ha'omer, the omer, which bring on, as we start counting Sfirat ha'omer, on the same day they would bring a minchat ha'omer, the day after the first day of Pesach, a mincha offering from barley, and the remainder of that is given to the Kohanim to eat. Shtei alechem, right? The kometz is burned, and the remainder is eaten by the Kohanim. Shtei alechem, the 2 breads that go with the kivsei atzeret that we just talked about on Shavuot, those are to be eaten by the Kohanim, right? You wave them with the korban, and then they're given to the Kohanim completely to eat. Lechem apanim, the showbread, that every week they would switch the 12 loaves, and the Kohanim would eat them. Shayarei menachot, the remainder of all the minchas we learned already, the Kohanim eats. All those are going to be exempt. Now, the second category here, we haven't even gotten to the word exempt yet, but we're going to get there. We have a long list of things that you're all exempt for. Now we're going to get to all sorts of actions that we're going to eventually say they're not actions that complete anything. They're kind of preparatory actions. They're not like slaughtering, which is a complete action, sprinkling the blood, which is a complete action, and burning, which is a complete action. But we're going to do all sorts of things that are not the final act. Okay, hayotzek, this is where we put, this is all these things relating to menachot. You pour the oil onto the mincha dough. Okay, you have the dough for the meal offering. You pour oil on it. Potate, this is one of the processes you do where after you bake before you do the komets, in certain of the cases, you bake the mincha and then you break it up into pieces, into really small pieces. That's potate. Bolel, you mix the dough. These are all mincha related. Hamoleach, if you salt, to salt the korban. These are what we want to talk about here is you did this action outside, You didn't burn it outside. You had a mincha offering that was designated for inside, but you did some of the process. But again, as I said, it's not the final process. So you salt it, because all the korbanot need salt on it, also the meal offerings. Menif and megish, you wave it, right? Some of the mincha offerings need waving. And megish, you bring it to the altar. There's an act where it's like holacha in the korban. It's called megish, hagasha in the mincha. And you actually would bring it to the altar, and then you would do the komets. The Kohen would do the komets there. He would take out the dough that he's going to burn on the altar. Hamisaderet hashulchan, if you set up the breads, the loaves of the showbread, and you put it on a table outside, or hamitivat hanerot, or if you clean out, there was a process, there was an avoda. It wasn't like just, we have to clean up. But we've seen before, like trumat hadeshen, right, where they would take the ashes from the altar. They would also clean out the candles. That was considered an act. V'hakomets, one who takes the komets out, when the Kohen puts his 3 fingers in and takes the komets out, and a makabel damim bachutz, and you accept the blood. All these things you do outside, patur. We actually quoted on the first page of the previous chapter, we had this whole thing, how do you know the komets and makabel damim is exempt? And then we said, why would you think to obligate them, right? It never says you're obligated. Why would you think to obligate them? And then they said, well, you might have thought it from a combination of shchita and hala'ah or zrika. Then we said, oh no, we don't learn from 2, right? We had that whole thing. But that, we already mentioned these 2 things. Okay, you're exempt. Ein chayavim alav, and by the way, all these actions, because they're not the final act of anything, they don't complete an action, you're not chayav if you do it outside, you're not chayav lo mishum sarut, v'lo mishum tum'ah, v'lo mishum mechusar b'gadi, v'lo mishum shelo rachutz yadayim v'raglayim. All sorts of other things that disqualify the acts of, the real sacrificial rites. So if you're a zar, you're going to get punished by death in all these cases, but not if you did these actions. If you're a non-Kohen and you did one of these actions, you won't get the death penalty. If you're tameh, impure, and you do one of these actions, you won't get killed. Lo mishum mechusar b'gadim, if the Kohen does it without wearing the priestly garments, and if he didn't wash his hands and feet. Right? Normally, if you would do one of the major avodot, you would get death penalty. Again, death by the hands of God, but you don't in these cases. Now we get to the history part. Ad shelohu kama mishkan. Okay, we're starting way back. Okay, going to like the Adam HaRishon. Okay, from the beginning, people could offer sacrifices wherever they wanted. Right, we see it throughout the Torah and Breshit. People are always, build a mizbeach, offer a sacrifice. So until Shelo Kama Mishkana, Yoah Bamot Mutarot. Okay, everyone could do whatever, right? Bamot were permitted anywhere they wanted. Avodah beBechorot, and the work was done by the Bechorot. We know that the firstborns were designated to be the ones working in the doing the sacrifices. However, Mishu Kama Mishkan, once Moshe put up the Mishkan, Ne'esru Bamot Avodah b'Kohanim. Then they shifted. Right? Number 1, you can't do anything outside, and number 2, only Kohanim are allowed to do the work. And not only Kohanim, but Kohanim instead of the Bechor. Okay, instead of the firstborns, we chose the Kohanim. Right, and that was also because of Cheda Egel, the sin of the golden calf. And then, what were the rules when the Mishkan was in the desert? Kodshe Kodashim Nechalim Lefnim Naklaim. So you had to eat the Kodshe Kodashim within the curtains of the courtyard of the tabernacle. V'Kodshim Kalim B'chol Machanei Yisrael, and where the camp was, which we know exactly where the camp was, right? They camped in the 4. We have the whole description in Bamidbar, where everyone was camped. anywhere within the camp, they could eat the kachim kalim, right? The shlamim meat that they wanted. Ba'u l'Shilo. Now, Ba'u l'Gilgal. They get to the land, and they first set up at Gilgal, their first camp. Hutrua bamot. They get into the land. Now bamot are permitted. Why? They have a mishkan. What's the issue? Well, the mishkan, first of all, doesn't anymore have the aron in it, because the aron is taken around. We're now going to have 7 years of conquering and 7 years of settling the land, where they just divided up all the boundaries. So in those 14 years, bamot were permitted. Number one, because the aron wasn't there anymore, and also because it says in the pasuk that we saw in Vayikra, ish, if you remember, asher yishchat, shor, or whatever, the pasuk Gimel and Daled in Vayikra Yud Zayin, it says if you slaughter it in the camp, remember we darshan that word? In the camp means, right, that you slaughter it, you slaughter it in the camp or outside the camp, which basically means in the wrong place. They learn from this word b'machaneh that there has to be a machaneh of Jews in order to say you have a designated place to do it. There was no machaneh because they hadn't yet settled. So because there was no machaneh, these laws are not in place. And therefore, even though there was a central mishkan, number one, it didn't have the Aron HaBrit in it, and number two, there was no machaneh of the people. So bamot were permitted. Kodesh kodshim, still though, you could only do kodesh kodshim in the mishkan, and they were only ne'achal lifnim and akleim, in the curtains, within the curtains of the mishkan, the walls. V'kodshim kalim b'chol makom. But then you could eat kodshim kalim anywhere. There was no limitation at all. Ba'u l'Shilo. Now they get to Shiloh. This is when they get the mishkan, right? It has its own place after the 14 years with the Aron sitting there. Nesru bamot. Back to forbidden. V'lo yasham tikad. I'm not sure why they're telling you this. It didn't have a ceiling. Ela beit avanim bilva milamatan. It was a stone enclosure, but from below, not above. Hayiriyot milamalan. It had a cover of a curtain on top. V'yaitam minucha. And this is what they call in the pasuk. Now we didn't see this pasuk yet, but in Dvarim Yubet, where it started talking about bring your sacrifices here, don't bring them other places. Ki lo batem ad ata, because you haven't yet come. Ela minucha ve'ela nachala. There it says you're doing now like whatever you want. Isha yashar be'enav. You could slaughter anywhere you want. You're not going to do that when you get into the land. And the point is because you haven't yet gotten to the minucha and the nachala. So now we're going to dash on what's the minucha, what's the nachala. The minucha is Shiloh. God saying you haven't yet gotten to Shiloh, where it was like a time of settling down. Minucha is rest. Okay, you haven't yet gotten there. So once you get there, it's forbidden. Kodshei kodashim. So when there's the mishkan. So again, no bamot. Kodshei kodashim nechalim lifnim and akleim. Obviously, the kodshei kodashim have to be within the curtains of the walls of the courtyard of this tabernacle. Kodshim kalim u'maser sheni b'chol haroeh. Now, maser sheni didn't come up before because weren't in the land yet. Maser sheni has to do with the land. When you're in the land and you have fruits, you bring them to the temple. So the kodshim kalim u'maser sheni is saying those you can eat. Now, it wasn't in Jerusalem, the temple, so it's not, the Jerusalem is where it is, like it was later. So it's anyone who could see Shiloh. Ba'u linov. Now, what happened after that? In the time of Eli, if you remember, there was a big battle with the Philistines, and they take the Aron, and the Aron's not there anymore. So then they move the Mishkan to Nov. So in Nov, it was there for 13 years, and then it goes to Givon for 44. So now, when they got to Nov and Givon, hutrua bamot, all of a sudden the bamot are permitted. This is the time we call in between the minucha and the nachala. The nachala is going to be the temple. So because of that, we permit the bamot again. Again, it's not stable. There's no aron there. Kodshei kodashim nechalim lifnim and akleim. Again, kodshei kodashim only within the walls of the Mishkan. Kodshim kalim b'chol arei Yisrael. Now we already define it differently. Now there's cities. Before that it was machanei Yisrael. Now they're actually living in cities. Okay, you can see how the times changed. Ba'u Yerushalayim. They got to Jerusalem. Beit HaMikdash nesru bamot v'lo haya lehem heter. Okay, so bamot are forbidden and there's no heter at all. V'hi hayta nachala, and that's the time we call nachala. Kodshei kodshim nechalim lifnim and akleim. Kodshei kalim maser sheni lifnim and achoma. So then the kodshim kalim can be eaten anywhere, only within the courtyard, and the kodshim kalim maser sheni within the walls of Jerusalem, which again is not the Jerusalem that we know. It was the walls of Jerusalem that existed then. Kol hakodashim shekdishan. Okay, now we're going to end with 3 stages. We talked before about 2, where you designated the animal when bamot were forbidden, and then you sacrificed it when bamot were forbidden, and you did it outside. That's the classic case, and that we said, if you remember, there was a whole braita we learned a few tapim ago, where that was pasuk aleph to dalid in chapter 17 of Vayikra. Then hey to zayin, we said, was actually talking about when you designated when the bamot were permitted, and then you sacrificed it outside when they were already forbidden. And then we said there's an asa and a lo taseh, but there's no karet there. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about now. Everything was done when bamot were forbidden. And you did it outside. You didn't fulfill a positive commandment, which is the positive commandment of Shama Taviu. This is in Dvarim. It says that's where you should bring them. You transgress a negative prohibition, which is Hishamer pen ta'aleh olotecha b'chol makom. Right? Don't be careful not to. This we had a whole drasha that we finally found it in Dvarim chapter. Actually, this was easier to find. This was the one on hala'ah, which was easier to find. That was in Devarim, chapter 12 there. And Chayavim Karet, because that's what it says in Vayikra Yud Zayin. Hikdisham b'shat heter b'mot v'ikrivam b'shat isur b'mot. But if you designated it when it was said, this is going to be a sacrifice, and it was still permitted to you in the b'mot, but then when you sacrificed it, it was already forbidden. Because you designated before, there's actually no karet, and that's in Psukim Hey Design. If you remember, lo yizbechu odetz v'chayim l'sirim, that we said was the negative prohibition, and the positive is you have to bring it there, right? It says, hevi'um laHashem, and they should be brought to God. So you can look back at the Psukim and see them there. That's in 5 to 7 in chapter 17. Now we add a third case, which we didn't discuss before, and this is where we'll end. What if you designated it when it was prohibited, like in Shiloh? Then, all of a sudden, it became permitted because they took away the Aron and there was no Mishkan. It still says, Haviyum LaHashem, and since you designated it when you had to bring it to God, you didn't fulfill that, but Ein B'hem Lo Taseh, because there is no Mishkan anymore. So it's not prohibited. Ve'elu Kodashim Krevim B'Mishkan. Okay, now, one last thing for today. What gets brought in the Mishkan? When you have Bamot. So what gets brought in the Mishkan and what gets brought on the Bamot Yachid that we're going to call them. So, Elu Kodashim Krevim B'Mishkan, Kodashim Shukdishu LaMishkan. Okay, they're going to tell you in a second what these are, but Kodashim that are designated for the temple, which is Korbanot Tzibor Krevim B'Mishkan, all the public offerings, the communal offerings, like the Korban Tamid and all the other ones are in the Mishkan. Korbanot HaYachid B'Bama, any individual offering, though, can be brought on the Bamot. Korbanot HaYachid Shukdishu LaMishkan, what if I say I'm going to bring an offering and I'm going to bring it to the Mishkan? So that's already different because I designated it for the Mishkan. So then Yikrivu B'Mishkan, those have to be brought in the Mishkan. But Imikrivam B'Bama Patur, but I'm not liable if I brought them in the Bamot. Okay, because theoretically I'm allowed to, just because I said I didn't fulfill what I promised, but I am actually not obligated for bringing them outside. With that, we finished for today. So what we did today, we finished up that last Mishnah and we discussed the different issues. Number one, that it goes according to Rabbi Nechemia about his perspective on the Shirayim, the remainder of the blood. Then we had to explain what was this Lamad Dvar Domeh, and basically it was coming to teach you this inference about only if it's lost, but not if you designate two for Achrayut from the beginning. Then one actually really becomes an Ola, and theoretically could be brought as an Ola, and therefore if you offered it outside, you're actually going to be obligated. Then we moved on to the next chapter, which basically discussed all sorts of cases from all different directions, either korbanot that if you offer outside, you're not going to be liable, either because they're korbanot that were not designated from the first place to be, or animals that were not designated to be offered or brought or anything in the temple, like the paraduma and the sira mishtalech, or the animal couldn't have been brought because the animal's disqualified, or the animal past its time. We had that machlok of Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis about what if it could be brought, like a mum that's going to go away, a blemish that's going to go away, or it hasn't yet reached the age, or something like that. Then we talked about what about korbanot that it's not yet their time to be brought, or all sorts of items that are meant to be eaten and not meant to be offered, so you won't be obligated. And then we taught, or actions that are not the complete action. Those were all the exemptions we saw. And then we got into the history about the Mishkan, when things were permitted, what was permitted when, what was forbidden when, and in each time period, where were things permitted to be eaten, what were the boundaries considered in those times, what was where the Kochim Kalim could be, and what was where the Kochim could be eaten. And then we ended with kind of what things are brought on which, when you do have Bamot, what's brought where. And we have one more Mishnah to finish up, and then we'll get to all the Gemaras on all this stuff. Wishing everyone a good day and a Shavua Tov.